I think we sometimes romanticize the early church as having their act together, okay? Because sometimes I believe that we don't feel like we always have our act together. And so we think, oh, if we could have just been closer to the time of Jesus or the time of the apostles, we'd have done a better job. But our readings today show us that that really is kind of a fantasy. The bottom line is that if you're going to be the church, you're going to make plenty of mistakes along the way, okay? And we are no different than the church in the first century. Notice that they're having a fight in the early church about who's getting what attention and who's not, okay? So we've got two different large groups of people at this point in time, the believers who spoke Greek and the believers who spoke Hebrew or Aramaic, all right? And so because of that, at one point in time, the Hellenists, the ones who spoke Greek, somehow believed, whether it was true or not, we don't even know, but they made the case that said, wait a minute, our widows, the Greek-speaking folks, are not getting the same treatment from everybody as the Hebrew speakers, the Aramaic speakers. They're not getting the same treatment. This isn't right, and this isn't fair. Did you ever think that was just common to just our century? It's not fair, okay? But all of a sudden the apostles then go, well, I guess this is a problem. And so they said, okay, let's fix this. Why don't you Greek-speaking members of the community present some folks to us that you think might be able to help in this situation? Present them to us, and then we'll go from there. And so they come up with this list, and we heard the names. And again, notice they're all Greek names. They're all, Greek-speaking names. They're not the Aramaic names or the Hebrew names. And so they said, here are the folks. And the apostles said, we're going to lay hands on them. And then they're going to be in charge of making sure that they're going to wait on all the folks to make sure that everybody's got enough to eat and that everybody's good. All right? And so, disaster averted for the moment, and everyone feels like they're being listened to, everyone feels like they're being heard, everyone feels like they're being cared for. We still have a responsibility to respond to those who aren't being cared for. It's still our job. We don't have a choice. It is part of who we are if we're going to be the body of Christ. Because you heard in the second reading that it's because of who we're called to be that we are supposed to be a chosen people, a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a people of God's own. And if we're going to be that, it means that we have to remember that we have a responsibility to respond to all those who might fall through the cracks. It means that we've got a lot of work to do. I always keep saying all the time, and this kind of refers to the same thing that the apostles were dealing with when they had to find 7 other people to help them. Because you notice what they said? You take care of the community, and we're going to take care of preaching the word. All right? Well, have you ever noticed that my job is to preach to you? But have you missed the part where it's your job to take care of the world? Have you missed that part? I preach to you, and you go out and change the world. That is still the way it's supposed to be. Now I'm going to ask you, who do you think has the harder job here? I think you do, all right? Because you're predisposed to try to listen to the word. I'm not saying you always do it, but you're predisposed to listen to it. At least nobody's thrown anything in the last year and a half that I've been here while I've been up here preaching. And I push you hard. I'm going to push you a little bit this morning, all right? Because my job is to make sure that you don't forget that you've got to take care of a world out there that needs you. It needs me too, all right? And I know I'm doing my part in trying to change the world, but what are you guys doing to try to make sure that the world is loved and that they still know that Jesus is alive, that the Lord rose from the dead and lives in us? That's what we're celebrating during this Easter time. So much so that the world never doubts that Jesus is here. How do we proclaim that life? How do we proclaim the gospel of life? How do we proclaim that life is precious because it belongs to God? And sometimes we get so complacent because we keep hearing on the news about this and that and the other thing that sometimes we're just like, oh, that happened again. That happened again. That happened again. Right now, we're in this cycle of, oh my God, there's been another mass shooting, another killing. And how many of you begin to just start to block it out because it just happens way too often? That's our tendency. When was the last time we shed any tears? When was the last time we realized that those are real people with real names? That those were people's grandparents and grandchildren? That each one of those lives is precious. And not just in that context, but in any context, that every life is precious. And you know, you've heard me long enough, I've been here long enough to say, I know that we care a lot about life in the womb. I know that as a community. That's why I don't have to preach about that quite as often. Okay? Because when I preach about that, you all nod. And you all look, like you're in the game. All right? But whenever I start preaching about the death penalty, or whenever I start preaching about immigration issues, every once in a while you kind of fold your arms and you just kind of look at me. Like, when will you stop going on about these things? And the answer is, I'll stop going on about these things when we get some of these things fixed. I'll stop going on about these things when there's nobody in the city of Branson going hungry tonight. I'll be quiet about these things when the mass shootings stop. I'll be quiet about these things when our government and us, because we bug our government, say that we want immigration reform. I'll be quiet about those things when all of them are taken care of. And if you think we're finished on the abortion issue, you are wrong. Because we haven't won the battle for everyone believing in life. We may have had some legal advancements here, but we've never won the game to get everybody convinced that life that's little in the womb is just as precious to us as any other form of life. We haven't won that one yet. We're a long way away from it. A long way away from it. And so, when Jesus looks at his followers and says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and before that he says, in my Father's house there are many rooms. There are many dwelling places. The thing is that I believe beyond a question of a doubt that Jesus creates dwelling places for us in a different spot. That's my hope. I was going into church this morning in Forsyth, and one of the people said to me, they said, Father, how are you doing this morning? I said, I think I want to make it for another day. And she goes, well, it's better than the alternative. And I said, really, is it? She goes, oh yeah, that's true. There's heaven. I said, absolutely. And I trust in that. That has to be my hope. Okay? And I hope it's your hope as well, that we're all going to live forever and that God is making a space for us. But if we're going to be other Christs, how about are we making a space for everybody else? Okay? So I know God's making a space for everybody, but it's up to you and I, if we're going to be other Christs and we're going to act like Jesus, then it's up to us to make a room for everybody else. Especially all the people that want to sometimes we want to push out of the room because they act different from us, or they sound different from us, or we just don't understand them at all. What are we doing to make a room for them? I'd be sad if somebody came in here and then left because somehow they didn't feel any love from this community here in Branson. I hope that every single one of you visitors were at least greeted at least once on the way in the door today. I hope somebody said, we're happy you're here. I hope you feel some of the love that this community has, because one of our ministries is to take care of all of you who come to visit. And if we're not doing that, then we're not doing our jobs. We're not doing things as well as we could. So when was the last time you shed some tears for some of those other people that sometimes miss your purview? I'm going to tell you that Friday morning was a strange morning. It was First Friday, so we had Mass at 10. We don't normally have Mass on Friday, just Mass in Forsyth. We had Mass here at 10. And at that Mass, I told everybody, I said, I was sitting there in my chair this morning and I was reading a reflection on the readings, and I don't normally ever touch my computer before Mass because it's usually an invitation to disaster. Okay? So most of the time I never get to see my computer before the day, and I never get to see any reflections on the readings. A lot of times I see them at night. But this day, I was sitting there and I was at my computer and I had an extra hour. So I was sitting there and I was going through things, and I just sat there and I read this particular person's reflection on the readings, and I just started to cry. Because I realized that there were a lot of people that I hadn't prayed for lately. Oh yeah, I pray for the people I know. But how many of the other ones have I prayed for lately? Because again, that has to be our hope, that we can make room for all these people. We can make room for these people in the same way that God makes room for everybody. Can we make room for all these people? And so I cried about it again on Friday morning. I thought I had it on my system. I came to Mass and I started preaching, and I was a mess. I managed to get through it last night without being a mess, and so we'll see what happens today. Good luck. But what I'm going to say is, as I read this reflection, I just want to share something with you. And I've changed it a little bit to make it a more Missouri-friendly, if you will, if that really is friendly. But this is by a man by the name of Christopher Parker, and he works for America magazine. And he just wrote this reflection. And he was talking about the fact that because God makes rooms for all of us, that's our reason to hope. And when he mentioned all the people that need to be in those rooms, again, it moved me. I hope it moves you. That God makes rooms for Charles Earl Westbrook, 28, who died 2.5 hours into the year 2023 in Columbus, Ohio. He was the victim of the first mass shooting of 2023 here in the United States. And they still keep happening. That God makes rooms for Sonia Argentina Guzman, 25, Diana Velasquez Alvarado, 21, Julissa Molina Rivera, 31, Jose Jonathan Cesares, 18, and Daniel Enrique Lasso Guzman, 8 years old, all migrants from Honduras, shot and killed a couple of weeks ago now in Cleveland, Texas, by their neighbor. That God makes rooms for the 3 or more women killed every day by their domestic partners here in the United States. 3 each day killed by their domestic partners here in the United States. And how many of their names do we know? How many tears have we shed? Rooms for all the women here in Missouri and around the world who died from complications of childbirth in 2020 at a rate of 1 every 2 minutes around the world. 95% of those deaths occur in low and lower middle income countries, and here in Missouri in our middle income counties. And it's because of a lack of medical care in those places. And yet, we and our legislators seem locked in a fight to figure out who's going to meet that response. Rooms for 144 residents of Florida killed last September by Hurricane Ian. One of the worst storms to ever hit the state. And all of the natural disasters that keep coming our way. And are our brothers and sisters sometimes just numbers? Or are they people with faces and names? Rooms for Tyree Nichols, beaten to death in January by police in Memphis, Tennessee. Rooms for the young victims of suicide in the LGBTQ community, children for whom religious affiliation creates a higher risk for suicidal thoughts of ideation within a group that already disproportionately struggles with questions of suicide. And so what you got to remember is that when LGBTQ kids belong to our churches, they're even more at risk because somehow they feel more judged and less loved here in our churches from us. This one will get you. Rooms for middle-aged white men who suffer the highest rate of suicide in our country. White middle-aged men made up 70% of all the suicides in the U.S. in 2020, according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. 70% of all the suicides in the U.S. white, middle-aged men. Anybody in here feel that? Rooms for anyone lost during the pandemic. Rooms for all those who took care of them who died. Rooms for Cassandra Williamson, who was murdered here in Missouri in 2002. She was 6 years old, beautiful little child. But also rooms for Johnny Johnson, a murderer who's been sentenced to death by the state of Missouri to die using your tax dollars and my tax dollars. And we're going to murder him in the name of justice and in the name of the state so that we can teach him and everybody else in the state that murdering is not a good thing. And does that make any sense to us? Rooms for the 40 who died by fire in Ciudad Juarez, locked in their jail cells because of our policies at the border and our inability to somehow do anything with them because we're on one side of the political fence or the other side of the political fence. And really, trust me, the Democrats nor the Republicans are on my good side for any of that right now. And rooms for all those whose lives have been affected, even during the sequence of the time that I've taken to do this homily this morning. Rooms for anybody who might have been in harm's way in the last 12, 15 minutes. Have we shed any tears? Have we let any of these things move us to action? Have we made any calls? Have we talked to our legislators? Or do we just keep voting for the same people we've been voting for and not caring what they're doing? These rooms are our hope as Christian people. These rooms that we believe that each person's death will be a reunion with the one who created them. Hope is how we face death and destruction, but hope is also what makes us take the time and make the difference in the here and now. It's the only thing, hope is the only thing I think that can unite us across these political fissures that people have drawn in our lives and that we keep putting up with. Hope is what needs to move us. Faith is what needs to move us. Because if God's going to create a room on the other side, what kind of rooms are we creating here? What kinds of rooms are we creating here where everyone has a place and where everyone feels God's love? I'm going to pray for you this week. I'm going to pray that somewhere, somehow, you'll shed a tear for somebody else. If it's one of your own, I'm sorry that it's that close. But if you haven't shed a tear for all the rest of the messy issues in the world, then I'm going to pray for you probably twice as hard. Because we are supposed to be a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a people of God's own. And if we're going to be other Christs like that, then our presence in the world needs to be making a difference in the world. Standing back and wringing our hands and saying, oh, isn't that a shame, isn't the same as doing something about it. And so pick your issue. Trust me, there are plenty. But pick your issue. Show a little bit of concern by making a room for someone else, one of your brothers or sisters, in your heart and in the world.